Life is not a series of random moments, but a sacred tapestry woven with divine intent. Every joy, every sorrow, every unanswered prayer is but a thread in the grand design of eternity. The silence you fear, the waiting that wearies your soul, the trials that press against your spirit, these are not signs of abandonment, but movements in a celestial symphony, shaping you for something beyond your sight. The seed does not see the tree within itself, yet in the darkness beneath the soil it is growing. So too are you. The delays are... Life has a way of making us feel forgotten. We pray, we strive, we wait, but nothing seems to change. The doors remain closed, the answers seem distant, and in the silence, doubt creeps in. Has God abandoned me? Has He overlooked my dreams? Why is nothing happening? But my friend, let me tell you something. God is not absent. He is not idle. He is working, even when you cannot see it. You may feel buried, but you are not forgotten. You are being prepared. Think of a seed. It is placed deep in the soil, covered in darkness, hidden from sight. It does not see the sun. It does not hear the wind. There is no sign of movement, no evidence of progress. And yet, beneath that soil, something miraculous is happening. Roots are forming. Strength is building. Transformation is taking place in the silence. And then in the appointed time, the seed breaks through. It reaches toward the heavens, bearing fruit, standing tall. But that moment of breakthrough would never come without the season of being buried. The darkness was not a grave, it was a womb. That is where some of you are right now. You feel hidden, unseen, forgotten. You've been faithful, you've been praying, you've been holding on, but it seems like nothing is happening. What you don't realize is that you are in the hands of the master gardener, and he knows exactly what he is doing. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before God called him to lead a nation. Joseph sat in a prison before he was placed in a palace. David was anointed as king, but sent back to the fields before he ever saw a throne. Over and over again, Scripture shows us this pattern. God prepares in private before he elevates in public. He strengthens in silence before he releases the breakthrough. So don't mistake the waiting for wasting. God does not waste seasons. He does not waste pain. He does not waste time. He is cultivating something within you, something bigger than you could build on your own. Maybe he is refining your faith, deepening your character, stretching your endurance. Maybe he is removing things that would hold you back or adding wisdom that will sustain you when the blessing comes. Sometimes we want the destination so badly that we forget the preparation is part of the promise. We want the open door without the discipline. We want the blessing without the breaking. But if God were to hand us everything we desired before we were ready, we would not be able to sustain it. A foundation must be laid before a building can stand. A tree must develop deep roots before it can bear fruit. And so it is with you. Maybe the silence you feel is not a sign that God is distant, but a sign that he is closer than ever, working beneath the surface of your life. Maybe the waiting is not a delay, but a divine design. Maybe the very thing you are questioning is the very thing God is using to prepare you for something beyond your imagination. So don't rush the process. Don't despise the season you're in. What God is building in you is not small, and that is why the preparation feels long. But hear me, he is faithful, he is moving, and at just the right time, you will see the fruit of what he has been doing all along. You are not buried, you are being planted. We've all been there, standing at the edge of what we thought was our moment, only to watch the door close before we could step through. The opportunity slipped away, the relationship didn't work out, the dream that seemed so certain fell apart in our hands. And in those moments, it's easy to wonder, God, why? Why would you lead me here just to turn me away? But what if the delay isn't denial? What if the detour isn't a mistake? What if the very thing that feels like a setback is actually God's way of setting you up for something far greater than you imagine. So often, we measure our progress by movement. If things are happening, if doors are opening, if prayers are being answered quickly, we assume we're on the right track. But God doesn't operate on our timeline. His purpose is not bound by our schedules. And sometimes His greatest work happens in what feels like a standstill. Look at Joseph. He had a dream as a young man, visions of greatness, of leadership, of purpose. But instead of rising to power immediately, he was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and falsely imprisoned. By all appearances, his life was moving in the wrong direction. If we had seen him sitting in that prison cell, we might have thought his dream had died. But God had not forgotten him. What Joseph couldn't see was that each setback was actually positioning him for something greater. Had he gone straight from his father's house to the palace, he wouldn't have been ready to lead. It was in the pit that he learned perseverance. It was in slavery that he learned stewardship. It was in the prison that he learned patience. By the time Pharaoh called him to interpret a dream, Joseph had been prepared to step into his destiny. Maybe you're in that in-between place right now. Maybe you've been praying for a breakthrough, and instead of moving forward, you feel like you're being pulled backward. But what if this season is not about punishment, but about preparation? What if God is allowing you to walk a different path, not because He's forgotten your purpose, but because He's refining you for it? There is something about the detour that teaches us to trust. When the road takes an unexpected turn, when the timing doesn't make sense, when we feel like we're going the long way around, that is where faith is built. It's easy to trust God when everything falls into place, but real trust is forged when nothing makes sense, yet we still believe He is leading us. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before they reached the promised land. Not because God had abandoned them, but because He was preparing them. He had to take Egypt out of their hearts before He could bring them into their inheritance. And sometimes God will take us on the longer path, not to withhold His promise, but to ensure that when we arrive, we're ready to handle it. So, don't despise the detour. Don't curse the delay. What you see as wasted time, God sees as necessary preparation. What you think is holding you back may actually be the very thing propelling you forward. And when the time is right, when your heart is ready, when your faith has been strengthened, when the lessons have been learned, the door will open. The path will become clear, and you will step into what God has been preparing for you all along. He is never late. He is never wrong. And He is leading you exactly where you are meant to go. No one likes the fire. No one asks for trials, for hardship, for seasons of struggle. When we face pain, when life presses in on all sides, our first instinct is to ask why? Why me? Why now? Why this? We cry out to God, asking Him to remove the weight, to take away the burden, to bring relief. And sometimes He does. But other times He allows us to walk through the fire, not to destroy us, but to refine us. Gold is not purified in comfort. It is refined in the furnace, where the heat burns away the impurities and leaves behind something stronger, something purer, something more valuable. And in the same way, faith that has never been tested is faith that has never been proven. Look at the men and women God used throughout history. Not one of them stepped into their calling without first walking through difficulty. Moses endured the wilderness before leading a nation. Elijah faced famine and opposition before calling fire down from heaven. Job lost everything before he saw restoration. The disciples suffered persecution before they carried the gospel to the ends of the earth. Every great move of God has come through the hands of those who are willing to endure the fire. And I know when you're in it, it doesn't feel like refining. It feels like breaking. It feels like everything you thought was secure is slipping away. Maybe you've lost something, a job, a relationship, a dream. Maybe you're facing struggles that no one else sees, carrying a weight that feels impossible to bear. And the enemy whispers, "Where is your God now? If he loved you, he would have spared you from this." But listen to me. God is not punishing you. He is using what the enemy meant for harm and turning it for good. The fire is not where you are destroyed, it is where you are made new. Think about the 3 Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow to a king who opposed their faith, and because of it they were thrown into a fiery furnace. But the fire did not consume them. The flames did not touch them. And when the king looked into the fire, he saw not 3 men, but 4, because the Son of God was in the fire with them. That is the promise you have today. God never said you wouldn't go through trials, but he did promise you wouldn't go through them alone. He did promise that he would walk with you through the storm, through the valley, through the fire, and when you come out on the other side, you won't even smell like smoke. Some of you are praying for God to remove the very thing he is using to strengthen you. Some of you are begging for escape when God is saying, "Hold on, I'm doing something in you that you cannot yet see." The fire you are walking through today is the testimony you will tell tomorrow. The battle you are fighting now is the strength you will carry into your purpose. If you are in the fire, don't give up. Don't lose hope. Don't believe the lie that this is the end of your story. The fire is not here to consume you, it is here to refine you. And when it has done its work, you will rise stronger, purer, and ready for what God has been preparing for you all along. You are not being destroyed, you are being transformed. Life rarely unfolds in a straight line. More often it feels like a series of disconnected moments, some beautiful, some painful, some that make sense and others that leave us wondering if God is still writing our story at all. We look at the broken pieces, the disappointments, the unexpected turns, and we ask, what does it all mean? But God is a master artist. He does not see as we see. Where we see fragments, he sees the full map. Where we see detours, he sees design. Every moment, every trial, every triumph, every tear that falls unseen is being woven into something greater than we can comprehend. Have you ever looked at the back of a tapestry? It's a mess of tangled threads, knots, and colors that seem to have no order. But turn it over and you'll see a breathtaking picture. Something carefully designed by the hands of a master weaver. That is what God is doing in your life. Right now, you may only see the tangled threads. You may only see the pain, the confusion, the moments that don't seem to fit. But God sees the full design, and one day he will turn it over and show you what he was creating all along. Look at the story of Joseph. If you had met him in the pit where his brothers had thrown him, you would have seen nothing but betrayal. If you had seen him in prison, falsely accused, you would have thought his life was nothing but injustice. But God was weaving a story. The betrayal placed him in Egypt. The prison placed him before Pharaoh. And the throne placed him in a position to save the very brothers who had once sought to destroy him. What others meant for evil, God was shaping for good. And that same promise is true for you. Maybe right now, you're standing in a chapter of your life that doesn't make sense. Maybe you've faced rejection and you're wondering why God allowed it. Maybe you've been through pain that you never asked for and you don't see how it could ever be redeemed. Maybe you're waiting for a breakthrough that seems impossible. But hear me, God is not just with you in the good moments. He is just as present in the ones that don't make sense. And he is using every part of your journey. The things you thought were setbacks may turn out to be the very steps that lead you to your purpose. The pain you thought was pointless may be the very thing that deepens your compassion, your wisdom, your ability to reach others. The struggle that you are walking through today may be the preparation for the calling that is coming tomorrow. In the book of Romans, we are given a promise. All things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Not some things, not just the good things, all things. The blessings and the burdens, the victories and the valleys, the moments we understand and the ones that leave us questioning. God does not waste anything. He does not write meaningless chapters. Even the silence has a purpose. Even the waiting is shaping something within you. So do not lose heart. Do not give up in the middle of the story thinking that what you see now is all there is. You may not see the full picture yet, but you will. One day you will look back and realize that every step, every tear, every moment of uncertainty was a part of a greater plan. And when that day comes, you will stand in awe of what God was doing all along. You are not lost in a mess of broken moments. You are being woven into a masterpiece. Faith is easy when the road is clear, when prayers are answered quickly, when life unfolds the way we imagined. But real faith, the kind that sustains, the kind that moves mountains, is forged in the unseen, in the waiting, in the seasons when nothing seems to be happening. Maybe you're in that place right now. You've been praying, believing, holding on, but heaven feels silent. You're doing everything you know to do, but the breakthrough hasn't come. And in the silence, doubt whispers, maybe God isn't listening. Maybe nothing is changing. Maybe you've been forgotten. But listen to me. Just because you can't see God moving doesn't mean he isn't working. Just because you don't have all the answers doesn't mean he has abandoned you. Some of God's greatest work happens behind the scenes, in the places we cannot see, in the moments when we wonder if anything is happening at all. Think about a great artist standing before a canvas. At first, the strokes of paint seem random, scattered, unfinished. If you were to look at it in the early stages, you might think it was a mess. But the artist knows what he is creating. He sees the final masterpiece even when no one else does. He knows that every stroke has a purpose, even if it doesn't make sense yet. That is what God is doing with your life. Right now, you may only see scattered brushstrokes. Right now, the picture may seem incomplete. But God sees what you cannot. He knows what he is preparing. He is not finished yet. Think of Noah. God told him to build an ark long before a drop of rain ever fell. Day after day, year after year, Noah labored in faith, surrounded by people who thought he was a fool. He didn't have proof. He didn't have visible evidence. All he had was a word from God, and that was enough. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations, yet he grew old without a child. The years passed. The promise seemed impossible. But what Abraham didn't know was that God was working in ways beyond his understanding, preparing a legacy that would stretch for generations. Faith is not about what we see. It's about trusting the one who sees beyond what we can. It's about walking forward even when we don't have all the answers. It's about believing that the silence is not the absence of God, but the presence of his unseen hand, moving in ways we cannot yet comprehend. Maybe you've been waiting for something to change in your life. Maybe you've been praying for an answer, and it feels like nothing is happening. But I want you to know that waiting time is not wasted time. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity for God to deepen your trust, to strengthen your spirit, to prepare you for what is coming. A farmer does not plant a seed and dig it up the next day, demanding to see the harvest. He trusts the process. He knows that beneath the soil something is happening, even if he cannot see it. And so it is with you. Do not give up just because you don't see immediate results. Do not let silence convince you that God is not listening. His timing is perfect. His plans are greater than yours. And when the time is right, When the preparation is complete, the breakthrough will come. Until then, hold on, keep believing, keep walking forward. Because even when you cannot see it, God is working, and He is never wrong. The masterpiece isn't finished yet. There comes a moment in every journey when you have to decide, will you keep going or will you turn back? Will you trust that God is leading you somewhere greater, or will you give in to the temptation to stop where it's safe, where it's familiar, where you don't have to risk failure or disappointment? Some of you are standing at that crossroads right now. You've been through the fire, you've walked the long road of preparation, you've held on when the answers, and now the enemy is whispering, is it really worth it? Are you sure you heard God right? Wouldn't it be easier to just settle here? But hear me, this is not the time to turn back. This is not the time to give up. Everything you have walked through, everything God has been doing in you has been leading to something greater, and the enemy knows it. That's why the resistance has been so strong. That's why the battle has felt so heavy. Because the closer you are to the breakthrough, the harder the enemy fights to stop you. Think of the Israelites standing at the edge of the promised land. They had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. They had seen God provide manna from heaven, water from a rock, victory in battle, and now they were finally standing on the edge of what God had promised them. But when they sent spies into the land, 10 of them came back afraid. They saw the giants, they saw the obstacles, and they let fear convince them that it wasn't possible. Only 2 men, Joshua and Caleb, stood up and said, God has brought us this far. He will not fail us now. But the people listened to the voices of fear. They turned back, and because of it, an entire generation missed out on the very thing God had prepared for them. I wonder how many times we do the same. How many times do we stop just short of the promise because the opposition seems too great? How many times do we let fear convince us that what God has for us is too big, too difficult, too impossible? But I want to tell you today, if God has brought you this far, He will not leave you now. If He has carried you through the valley, if He has sustained you in the waiting, if He has been faithful in the trials, then He will be faithful to finish what He started. Do not let fear keep you from stepping into what God has for you. Do not let doubt rob you of the promise. The giants may be big, but your God is bigger. The obstacles may seem impossible, but nothing is impossible for the one who spoke the universe into existence. When Jesus called Peter to walk on water, Peter stepped out of the boat. He did something no man had ever done before. But the moment he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the wind and the waves, he began to sink. That's what happens when we focus on the obstacles instead of the one who called us. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you stepped out in faith, but now the storm is raging and fear is creeping in. Maybe you feel like you're sinking, but hear me. Jesus didn't let Peter drown. He reached out, took him by the hand, and lifted him up. And He will do the same for you. This is not the time to shrink back. This is not the time to settle. What God has prepared for you is greater than you can imagine. But you have to keep going. You have to take the step. You have to trust that the same God who led you here will be the same God who takes you there. So don't give up now. You're closer than you think.